Well, today's lesson is about binding, and the first part of the lesson is what size do we cut the binding and how do we stitch it on. So I cut my binding different sizes depending on what technique I'm using. So I'm going to sew it on the back of the item. It's a table topper piece or a little wall hanging, whatever you'd like it to be. And I'm going to top stitch it down with the sewing machine on the right side. So I've cut my binding here at 2¼ inches, and that usually works well for me. When possible, I do like to cut it lengthwise grain, and I'm going to sew it together on a 45-degree angle. So I've laid my first piece right side up, and I have my second piece that I'm going to lay right side down. And with this, what's going to happen is I'm going to stitch on a 45-degree angle across the two pieces. You do want to have a little overlap here and here. You don't want to line them straight up like this because that's a little harder to do. So you want a little overlap. I leave my selvage on when I cut my binding, so this is from selvage edge to selvage edge on these. I'm going to turn this and put it under the foot. The very first thing I'm going to do is put my needle in the down position and my foot in the pivot up position. At this point, I'm going to sew a straight line all the way to the other side of this. Now, if you're new at this, you might want to mark your fabric so that you know where this is. I have a Baby Lock Unity also, and on that particular machine, I have the guideline marker so I can utilize that. Now, I stitched this in white thread. It's actually a taupey white thread so that you can see it. Normally, I would stitch this in a gray. So I've stitched on that 45-degree angle. Now I'm going to go to the ironing board in my cutting station. I'm going to cut off all but 1/4 inch, and I'm going to press this. I'll be right back. So I'm back. I have my binding entirely pressed. Now, the top of my binding, what I consider the top edge, is with the fold to the left, the raw edge to the right, and I fold that top piece on a 45-degree angle and press that flat. So everything's been pressed flat. The other thing I want to check is to make sure that my seam does not end up on a corner. So I go around and I use binding clips and all different things to hold it in place. And I'm going to start this binding right about here. Now, I do not like to start right at a corner. I like to start kind of in the middle. So I'm in the middle. And you can do this one of two ways. I can put my walking foot on and you'll get a very nice, clean stitch sewing it on with your walking foot for the demonstration today so that I'm not changing feet all the time. I'm just leaving my piecing foot on for this small project. But definitely in a large project, I would use my walking foot. Now I'm going to position my foot down. Oh, and we want to sew on the back of our piece. So let me flip this over. Don't forget you're sewing on the back. Okay? And I want to leave about a 6-inch tail that's not stitched. So I'm going to put my foot down and position, and now I'm ready to sew. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch and I'm going to stop right at the end. And I'm also multitasking here, and I actually am winding bobbins on my Baby Lock Unity while I'm sewing. So the tip that you'll see on the blog is when you buy a spool of thread, buy 2 spools. Wind one entirely with bobbin and the other one use as your top thread. And that thread will last each other and you won't have to worry about rewinding your bobbins. So I'm pretty impressed. I may be halfway through that spool of thread and I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14 bobbins wound right now with that same spool of thread. Now, I'm going to stitch. And I'm not at a real fast speed. There's no reason to be at a fast speed. There's no reason to hurry with this. If I wanted to, I could up the speed just a little bit. When I get to the end or close to the end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop and I'm going to mark my corner. Now you'll need a ruler for this and you'll need a marking utensil. I'm going to use a white fabric marker so that you can see it, and a little small ruler. There's a product called glow tape. If your ruler does not have a 45-degree angle on it, you could put a mark on the ruler with the glow tape so that you know where that 45-degree angle is. And when you're close to that corner, you're going to draw a white line that gives you that 45-degree angle, and you're going to stop with the needle down in that. Now, if you're not good with figuring out how to stop the needle down, you can use your needle up, down position as many times as you need to get the needle exactly where you want it to land within that line. So one more and I'm there. So now I've stopped in the little white line. I'm going to turn my little piece and I'm going to stitch down that 45-degree angle line that I just drew. Off the edge of the piece, we'll cut our fabric, our thread, excuse me, and we'll move. Now, you're going to see that I have a 1/4 inch seam allowance and I've stitched on a 45-degree angle. Here's the next step that you're going to do. You're going to turn this fabric and you can finger press it. You can use what's called a fabric folding pen, but you're going to fold that and press it so that it lays flat like this. So I've just gone and picked up my fabric folding pen. It's a pen that looks like this. It has water and a few drops of a liquid that comes with it. And I run it across here, and that will press it really nice. And I sometimes even use the lid as an extra press if I want. And now you see that that lays nice and smooth. I keep this in a little coffee cup right beside my sewing machine, and that way it's right at my fingertips. So I have an iron very handy. So now I'm going to turn this back. The raw edge is going to line up with the raw edge on the right, and the fold edge at the top is going to line up with the raw edge on the top of the piece. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this back underneath my foot, starting to sew one stitch off of the fabric and then onto the fabric and continue to go. Now you might find you want to use an awl. An awl is a really handy tool to have right by your sewing machine. It has a sharp point. It will help you to hold things in place as you are stitching. So we're going to line this up, and I'm going to continue to do all 4 corners. And I'll be right back. So I've reached the other side all the way to where I began. So the beginning piece was pressed with a 45-degree angle, and the end piece here has been sewn down part way. Now what I noticed is that I need to press this a little farther in, meaning that I'm too close to this corner. So I'm just going to fold this and make another 45-degree press line on it and then show you the next step. So the space you need within all of this is probably about 8 inches. So where this piece ends, that was my beginning piece, and this piece ends, you want that space to be about 8 to 10 inches. The reason why is we're actually going to sew these together. Now here's what I do to sew these together. I now have that nice crisp 45-degree angle. I'm going to cut that piece of fabric right on the press line. Then I'm going to lay this piece inside of, very flat, that folded piece. Okay? So now it's laying inside of that folded piece. Then I'm going to take my white pen or my fabric marker, whatever it is you have, and I'm drawing a line across there. So now I have a line that's been drawn right across here. Then I'm going to take that same small ruler that I've been using, and I'm going to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to that line on the same angle. So I have my original line, and now I have my line with my 1/2 inch seam allowance and the tail to the left. So the line I drew, the first line, is to the right of the next line, which is on the left. With that, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open this up and sew the two of these together, but I'm going to draw that line all the way across that piece. Once I do that, then I'm going to put right sides together with these two pieces so that I can sew them. So when I look at this, it kind of gets twisted. This is probably the hardest part of the whole piece. I'm going to move all this stuff so you can see. Right side, and it's hard to see a right side on a batik, and that's what I'm using today, and right side together. So it's now put at that same 45-degree angle, and now I'm going to sew these two together. The second line that I drew is now my placement line for my raw edge. And if you feel better putting a pin in this, go ahead and put a pin in this. There's nothing wrong with pinning to make sure that you're good. I usually stitch a couple stitches and then I lay this out smooth. Now I just noticed that my needle came unthreaded, so let me pull this out. You know, it happens to everybody. It doesn't just happen to you. The thread comes out of the needle. Right, and let's do it again. Good practice, I tell myself the first time when I need to do it again. Okay, so I've started it. Now I'm going to lay this out smooth. You may find that you want more than the 6 to 8 inches, but it's hard to get it to line up then if you do more than 6 to 8 inches. Let's stop and cut my thread. If you're concerned, don't cut this piece off yet until you verify that everything lays correctly. So if I lay this here, you're going to see that that now lies very smoothly. Now I'm going to cut this piece out, the extra tail, leaving that 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to take it to the iron and press it, and then we're going to sew it down. So here's where we've joined our binding together, and now we're just going to finish stitching in the round, going around the placemat or the little tabletop or whatever you decide it is. And I always suggest when you do something like this that's new, start out with something small to practice it. Don't panic, take your time, and you'll get it done. Then you're going to take it to the ironing board and you're going to press all of this flat. So I'm going to do that next. So just to show you, I'm going to use the same gray taupey colored thread that's on my machine. Normally I would match the thread with what I'm doing so that you wouldn't see it, but on video I'd like you to be able to see it. I'm going to start in this corner right here and go just a little ways around the corner. And then I'll take that out and do it with the correct thread. You want to have the correct foot on when you do this. Depending on your machine, the Baby Lock, it's called a bi-level foot. The Viking has a left edge top stitching foot. The Pfaff has a bi-level foot. So each machine manufacturer has a foot that might work best to apply the binding. This is a great foot for top stitching or stitching in the ditch. So I've got this folded over. A lot of times I'll use a fusible bobbin thread in here so that when I fold this over and press it in place, it stays. I'm also going to adjust my needle position to land exactly on the edge of the fabric where I would like to see it. My foot is down and I'm going to put it in the needle stop down position, which becomes really important when we're going to turn the corner. Also, you want that awl handy to be able to help you turn those corners. Okay, I'm all set up and ready to go. I'm going to stitch and stop just before I get to that corner. And I might pause every once in a while, use my awl to help push things in and out of my way. It's kind of like a second finger and an additional finger. You can also use the purple thing, so there are many things to help you keep things in place. Now, the bulk of my binding, let's talk about that on the corner, is on the left-hand side on the bottom. So I'm going to put the bulk of this binding on the right-hand side on the top. So I'm folding it so that all the bulk is upward, okay? And I'm going to start, I'm going to stop, and here's where my awl comes in handy to hold all of this in place while I'm stitching. And I take one stitch at a time to land exactly where I want to land in my binding to turn my corner. And I'm there. Now when I turn my corner, I can do a beautiful corner turn and have everything land the way that it needs to. Now I'm going to cut this so that you can see how this is, and then you can go and finish your binding. There's the binding. Nice corner, nice edge. Makes beautiful because bulk on one side, bulk on the other side. I know that you'll enjoy putting binding on a lot more when you can get them done by machine. I still do hand stitched binding, but because I get so many things quilted and small projects made, I'm doing my binding a lot on the machine. Happy quilting!